Adrian Holt had everything the world believed defined a perfect life. Wealth that could make problems disappear, a sprawling mansion built like a palace, and a reputation that carried weight in every boardroom from New York to Tokyo. His signature alone could shift markets, and his presence at any event was enough to make headlines. But appearances had always been deceptive, and no one understood that better than Adrian himself. Because every night, when the mansion lights dimmed and the world outside faded, he found himself sitting alone at the head of a long, polished dining table that stretched across a room meant for 20 guests. The dishes before him were always exquisite. Steaming entrees crafted by top chefs, dessert sculpted like artwork, wine that cost more than some cars. But none of it mattered. He tasted none of it. He enjoyed none of it. And when he lifted his gaze, all he saw was emptiness. Silence. A silence that wasn't natural, but forced upon him. Adrian had been born with perfect hearing, able to appreciate the world in all its musical beauty. Laughter, wind chimes, orchestras, the crackling of a fireplace. But a devastating illness in his early 30s stole all of that away. Not gradually, not gently, but in a cruel, rapid descent that left him in complete silence within months. One day conversations were effortless. The next they were hollow ghosts. Soon, even the loudest sounds faded into nothing. The world kept spinning, full of noise he could no longer access, and he was left behind in a cage no one else could see. His doctors delivered the verdict with sympathetic faces. Permanent hearing loss. No foreseeable recovery. They encouraged him to adapt, to live a new normal, but none understood what it meant for someone who once cherished music, who once loved listening to people, to suddenly live in a world without a single sound. The mansion that had once been filled with music and voices now felt like a museum. Echoes still lived in the walls, memories of life before silence, but Adrian could not hear them anymore. Even footsteps from his staff were only visible, never audible. He saw lips move but never caught voices. He communicated in notes and gestures. He existed beside the people who worked for him, not among them. His wealth protected him from the outside world, yet it imprisoned him in another way. Isolation wrapped around him like a cold fog, thickening with every year that passed. He tried distracting himself with art, charity work, and gourmet meals, but nothing filled the hollowness. He had admirers, business associates, employees, but not a single person who truly knew him. Silence had become both his shield and his tormentor. Working quietly in this vast, lonely mansion was Rosa Melendez, a cleaning lady with kind eyes and a humble nature. Life had carved hardship into her bones, but she carried herself with a gentle resilience that made her seem stronger than most. She polished the hallways, dusted artifacts worth more than her yearly salary, and cleaned each room with careful respect, as though every object had a story. Despite the fact that Adrian couldn't hear her daily greetings, Rosa always smiled at him. She never treated him like a fragile man or a wealthy figure. She simply treated him like a human being. Adrian had noticed her kindness long ago, even if their conversations were short and written. Rosa was also the mother of a newborn baby boy, Mateo, an energetic, bright-eyed child whose laughter could make even the grumpiest person smile. But Rosa had no one to watch him during her long evening shifts, and the daycare she once relied on had shut down. With permission from the staff manager, she began bringing Mateo to work, keeping him in the staff area where he wouldn't disturb anyone. On a cold autumn evening, Adrian sat alone at his massive dining table once again. Steam curled off his plate. The chandelier glowed with warm golden light, and the entire room shimmered like something out of a magazine. But the beauty only emphasized the emptiness. The ache of silence pressed into him heavier than usual, and for a moment he closed his eyes, wondering if this lonely existence was simply all that remained for him. Meanwhile, in the staff corridor, Mateo wriggled out of the small playpen Rosa had placed him in. The little explorer toddled forward, following the warm light spilling from the dining room. Before Rosa could turn around, Mateo had already shuffled down the hall, tiny feet padding confidently toward the forbidden corridor. What happened next was something neither Rosa nor Adrian would ever forget. Mateo wandered right into the grand dining room, just as Adrian lifted another tasteless bite of food to his mouth. Adrian looked up, startled. The sight of a tiny toddler, chubby legs, wide innocent eyes, and a smile bright enough to warm any cold heart, standing at the entrance pulled him out of his monotony instantly. The baby stared at him with fascination, as if sensing something gentle beneath Adrienne's stern, isolated exterior. For a moment, Adrien just stared back, unsure what to do. He lived in silence. Nothing ever surprised him anymore. But this child, wandering without fear, without hesitance, was different. The presence of something so small and full of life created a warmth in the air that Adrien hadn't felt in years. Seconds later, Rosa rushed inside, breathless and horrified. She scooped Matteo up, bowing her head repeatedly, apologizing through wild gestures and mouthing frantic words Adrien couldn't hear. But then Matteo reached for him. The baby stretched out tiny hands toward Adrien, giggling, a sound Adrien couldn't hear but could feel. The vibrations were faint, almost imagined, but they stirred something inside his chest that had been dormant for far too long. Adrien raised a hand, silently signaling Rosa to stop. She froze. He gestured gently. "It's okay." Hesitant but obedient, Rosa set Matteo back down. The toddler immediately toddled toward Adrienne's plate, fascinated by the colorful vegetables and shiny silverware. Adrien watched with mild disbelief. No one approached him like this. No one saw him this way. No one treated him like anything more than a powerful, wealthy, unreachable man. But Matteo didn't care about any of that. Then, without warning, the baby placed his tiny warm palm over Adrienne's heart. A simple touch. But it hit Adrien with the force of a miracle. He froze, overcome. No one had touched him affectionately in years. No comforting pat on the back, no embrace, nothing. Matteo looked up at him with the innocent seriousness only babies possessed. His hand remained pressed Adrienne's chest, grounding him to the present, reminding him he was still human, still alive beneath all the silence. Matteo babbled, a stream of joyful noises Adrien couldn't hear. But something inside him responded anyway. A door inside his heart, sealed shut by years of loneliness, cracked open, and for the first time in years, a faint, genuine smile broke across his face. The following evening, as the sun dipped behind the tall iron gates of Hope Manor and shadows stretched across the marble floors, Adrien found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, waiting. He sat at the dining table earlier than usual, hands folded, eyes lingering on the doorway as if expecting a miracle to walk through it. When Rosa entered with Matteo on her hip, she paused, startled by the anticipation written so clearly on Adrienne's face. He offered her a small folded note, written in his elegant, practiced handwriting. "May Matteo visit the dining room again?" Rosa looked up, stunned. Her lips parted, but she hesitated, unsure she had misunderstood his meaning. When she saw the faint hope in his eyes, she nodded more from instinct than thought. Adrien exhaled slowly, a deep breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. From that day on, Matteo became a regular guest at the long, lonely dining table. It became a ritual. Adrien at the head of the table with his stern-backed chair and his meticulously arranged dinner, and Matteo beside him in a tiny portable seat Rosa set up, complete with his bright pink lunchbox and sippy cup. The contrast between the baby's colorful meal and Adrienne's elegant plated dishes was almost comedic, but the staff adored the sight. Some days, Matteo clapped his hands excitedly at the reflections bouncing off the crystal glasses. Other times, he waved at Adrien as if conducting a silent orchestra only he could hear. And sometimes, when the world felt calm and peaceful, the toddler would lean over and press his cheek against Adrien's sleeve, as if claiming a small corner of warmth for himself. Adrien found himself living for those moments. The mansion staff whispered among themselves, unable to hide their astonishment. They had never seen their employer smile so much. They had never seen him linger over a meal instead of finishing robotically. They had never seen him gently touch anything with the kind of careful affection he now showed Matteo. The silent mansion, once a prison of luxury, slowly began to feel alive again. Weeks passed, and Adrien started noticing things he had long ignored. He felt faint vibrations through the floor when people walked by. He sensed the soft rustle of curtains when the breeze slipped through the windows. He even felt the quiet rhythm of his own breathing, something he had forgotten to pay attention to. Doctors had told him repeatedly that his hearing would never return, not even partially. But something inside him had awakened. Not sound, not exactly, but awareness, presence, a way of feeling the world again. For Adrian, that was a miracle on its own. One evening, as Rosa cleared the table and began packing Mateo's snacks, the little boy stood unsteadily on Adrienne's lap. With pure fascination, he pressed his tiny ear against Adrienne's chest. He discovered the rhythmic thump of Adrienne's heartbeat, and the sensation made him giggle uncontrollably. Adrian couldn't hear that giggle, but he felt the vibrations to Mateo's small body, soft, warm, and absolutely full of life. Something inside him cracked wide open. Tears welled in his eyes and began to fall silently, unexpectedly, uncontrollably. Rosa froze mid-movement, her brows lifting, the napkin in her hands dropping lightly onto the table. She had never, ever seen Adrian Holt cry. He was a man who never allowed himself to appear vulnerable. But now, with Mateo pressed against his chest, he sobbed, not from pain, but from a joy so overwhelming it broke down walls he didn't know still existed. He shook his head gently at Rosa's concerned expression, lifting a hand to reassure her. These tears were good, necessary, healing. As days turned into weeks, Adrian and Mateo developed their own language, one of gestures, shared looks, touches, and expressions. They didn't need sound. They didn't need words. Their communication was instinctive, pure, and rooted in something deeper than spoken language. The staff noticed, too. They lowered their voices around the mansion not out of necessity, but out of respect for the new warmth growing in its grand halls. Even though Adrian couldn't hear, the house itself seemed quieter, calmer, perhaps because its master finally felt understood. Rosa, however, felt a quiet worry growing inside her. She saw Adrienne's growing attachment, the softness that blossomed whenever Mateo entered the room, the subtle fear in his eyes whenever the toddler left at the end of the shift. She wasn't sure she could meet the emotional needs of a man who had carried loneliness for so long. She wondered if her presence was helping or unintentionally creating a deeper dependence. But before Rosa could overthink further, Adrian made a decision that stunned her. One afternoon, he asked to speak with her privately through a set of written notes. His words were simple yet life-changing. He offered her a private cottage on the estate, newly renovated and safe. He offered a significant salary increase so she could care for Mateo without worry. He offered security, peace, and stability, things Rosa had desperately needed but never dare hope for. Rosa's hands trembled as she read the note. Tears filled her eyes, falling before she could stop them. She tried to apologize, to decline, to explain she didn't want him to feel obligated. But Adrian shook his head gently. This wasn't obligation. It was gratitude, connection, something he didn't know how to express except through actions. He had lost sound, but found something far more profound. He found family. Since Mateo wandered into his silent world, Adrian had slowly rediscovered emotions he had buried. Gentleness, affection, warmth, belonging. Without knowing it, Mateo had given him back his life. Not